Thank you, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri, and our next guest is one of the most formally daring, smart, and relentless filmmakers working right now, one of my favorites. In her new film, The Assistant, Kitty Green explores a day in the life of an assistant to a high-powered, sexist, abusive movie mogul. Sound familiar? By approaching the subject in extremely specific, mundane detail, Green doesn't just indict the mogul himself, but those who surround him and the hyper-capitalist system he operates within that shields and protects him while he abuses everybody around himself. Please welcome Kitty Green. Hey.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, that was lovely.
Oh, you know I love the film. I've told you many times. And I really like your work. I mean that when I say formally daring. And what is so, I think, one of the things that is so daring about you as a filmmaker is that you come up with an idea, almost like a rule for how you're going to tell this specific story, be it casting Jean Benet, be it The Assistant, and you really stick to that. And that rule itself is thematic, and it illuminates the idea in a greater way than I think a sort of more straightforward narrative approach would be. Though I would never say this isn't a straightforward movie. If anything, it is very straightforward. Yeah. Talk about when you came up with this approach for telling this story.
I'm not sure. I mean, with every project, I get interested in kind of the themes and the issues first, and then how I'm going to tell it later. So the form normally kind of comes as I'm sort of exploring, well, what's the best way to go about this? And with something like this, it started with looking at a lot of the Me Too coverage and being a little disappointed the way people were focusing on the predators and kind of these sensational stories, and were less interested in kind of broader systems and structures that were keeping women out of power.
But we know why we're focused on the predators and the specific person, because we don't have to indict ourselves, we don't have to indict the system itself. We can still sort of operate in this idea that there's one bad apple, or two bad apples, or three, or five, or a lot.
Yeah.
You know, but
yeah,
still, they're individualized,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's it. And this idea that if we get rid of Harvey Weinstein, everything will be fixed. And it's like, no, the problem is so much bigger than any one person. And so and the best way to talk about that is to really explore kind of the system rather than looking at it from the top down, looking at it from the bottom up. Like, let's look at the person, study a day in the life of a person who has the least power in an organization like that, and what that's like for them, why they're not being promoted, why they're stuck in these kind of jobs, which are, especially young women, don't get to climb the corporate ladder as easily as some of the boys would. So yeah.
And who's also not a classical victim, right? They're not who we would normally approach or the story that we would normally tell in regards to who a victim is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, she's a victim of a very toxic work environment, and she is, essentially that's true. But whether she's not there, she doesn't have it. There's no sexual misconduct when it comes to her. Yeah, so that was something that I really felt like there is a lot of that. It's so horrific and it's so delicate. Like, almost talking about these issues gets really tricky and complicated because there's so many levels of trauma, you know what I mean? It's not just the one thing. It's like kind of all these different people have different experiences of this kind of system that's been around that's hurt and sidelined women for years and years and years.
But your approach to not focusing on the predator and not focusing on what we would, I don't know exactly how to articulate this well, the classical victim, as I was saying before, someone who was a victim of actual assault, you know, and I'm not saying that the assistant in this scenario isn't a victim herself and isn't being traumatized, but who we would normally focus on, right? You offer no reward, no catharsis, and no titillation, which I think is extremely important and something that is often disregarded when it comes to telling stories like this. When did you realize that that was going to be so necessary, and realize what kind of power that would have as a viewing experience?
Ooh, I'm not sure. There's a point after I spoke to a lot of people and did a lot of research, and you realize how the behaviors like this were allowed to continue for so long because no one was there. We didn't have the avenues or spaces to speak up about misconduct back like a few years ago, only 2 or 3 years ago that was the case.
I fear we still barely do.
Exactly. But I feel like we're getting better, and it is getting easier to speak up once you see something that makes you uncomfortable. There are avenues and there are people you can reach out to, but back then there was nothing. So I kind of did want to explore just, I wanted to kind of look at how, sort of examine how somebody who is, sorry, I'm sort of going nowhere with this, but this idea of her being stuck in this system that's structured against her, and it's also very, very conscious of what's going on around her, but doesn't have enough information to get what she's seeing across to anybody.
And she's also basically taught that the only way for her to get ahead is to absorb these abuses of power and to not just neglect them, but sort of help profligate them.
Yeah.
Right? At one point, she is essentially taught that
Yes.
you know, if you want to move ahead, if you want a good career, you know, let these things happen, turn a blind eye. Don't just turn a blind eye, help them happen.
Yeah. But also, I mean, I think we were trying to explain to audiences how that was able to continue because, I mean, she doesn't have a choice. You know what I mean? You can see the way that she's being crushed by all these kind of forces around her and the culture of silence at her company. And all of that is demonstrating to audiences. Just, I think people don't really understand how this was able to go on so long. And it's pretty clear once you put all the elements together, you know what I mean? It's an awful day she's having, basically.
And in a way, it's not just her that's getting crushed. I mean, it's not that even Matthew McFadden, right? Fadian? Is that how you say it? I've interviewed him like 3 times, I think, and I'm still getting, sorry, Matthew. Even he, you feel like, well, there's a corporate chain above him that he's worried about losing his job. We operate in a system where like nobody wants to be without a job, and if you're working in some sort of system where there are abuses at hand, and if you speak up, you're going to lose your job. What option do you really have? It takes a remarkably brave person to do something in that, and most people are not. Are not?
That's the question.
Yeah.
No, I mean with Matthew's character, I think I spoke to a lot of people who have mentioned that HR departments are there to protect the company and not the employees.
Every company.
Yeah, and that happens everywhere, and that is something that we need to think about and needs to change. So that was definitely part of what I was trying to explore. Basically, we're looking at these kind of, when I say the word system, it sounds so like broad and not like actually, I was trying to find concrete examples to explain what I mean by systemic repression and like systemic gender imbalance. So it was about all those tiny moments, which is someone like Matthew coming along and kind of gaslighting her essentially and making her doubt her positions and doubt what she's seen and doubt herself and leaving her completely kind of rattled and confused when she comes out the other side. So that was one part of this kind of bigger story.
And there's absolutely a gender imbalance within that scene, but I wonder that person in reality, how many people have done that to him? You know,
exactly.
In his first years at the company, when he went up to someone and was like, "Did you hear what is happening? Did you see this?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah, no, don't. It's not happening. You know, don't worry about it."
Oh yeah, that you can tell that the way that the boys that she works with can be quite mean to her, but you can also see the way they're being abused, and they're being kind of definitely verbally abused, if not physically. There's like a big bang when one of them comes out of the office,
and it looks like he's been crying or is about to cry.
Yeah, exactly. Poor little guy.
And they're also in their own way trying to help her and coax her along in what they think is the best way possible, in the ways of behavior that they've learned probably from the people that were in their positions when they were in her position in a way.
Yeah, completely. Those kind of behaviors repeat themselves, and it is a cycle. And you find that even she's a little rude to the driver at the end of the movie. And we were kind of exploring the way that kind of behavior, how it's perpetuated, and essentially, and you can see it through her journey, but also through the boys.
When you started writing it, I'm always fascinated, again, going back to sort of creating a rule and really sticking to it. Did you have any moments where you doubted the aesthetic choices that you were making? Because they're very formal and they're very specific. Were you ever worried that like, oh, how am I going to know that like the audience is going to get this or this is going to have the power? Or were you always very sure of what you were going for?
I mean, we were in her head a lot. The film is shot from her perspective. And so whenever you see someone enter that office, especially when it's a woman and she's unsure as to what that woman's doing there, we kept it wide because it was her point of view. So we never went in close on these beautiful women that were coming and going from the office. And I mean, at times you worry, oh, will I get my point across? Do we need to be up close to figure this out? But I really want to stick with this idea that no, the audience only gets to know what Jane knows. So the audience only gets her perspective. And that, I mean, it's worrying, but I think when you're in the edit, you kind of, I'm glad I stuck to my guns and did it the way I needed to do it.
Well, that's what's so interesting, though, because people tell you get more coverage for your edit. But would you say that you're the opposite of that in a way?
I'm an editor, so I co-edited this with my friend Blair. And so I'm always thinking about the edit as I'm going, and we had so little shoot days. We shot in 18 days, so there was no time for coverage. Often we just had to get it in one and hope for the best. So yeah, I'm glad it worked out. It was kind of a meticulously planned and edited almost beforehand and storyboarded, so we kind of knew what we were getting because of the little time. But yeah, there was no choice.
Do you have a crew that you're working with who, for the most part, knows what your aesthetic model is and what you're going for, so that nobody on set is like, "Are you sure you want to do that, Kitty?" or anything like that?
Well, we had an amazing crew, and we headed up by a first AD, Annalisa, who just ran our set like incredibly well and beautifully. And but I worked with the same cinematographer since film school, and he and I lived together when we were 18, so we kind of have this shorthand that's very. We fight like an old married couple. It's kind of bizarre, but
within that fights there's a trust.
Yeah,
definitely. Or he or she. Sorry.
But the thing about him is, I assumed he knows what I need. I often frame and he lights, and that's kind of the way we work together. Right. And he knows what I need and knows what I want. And I was like, oh, we have a shared aesthetic, and he's like, no, we don't. I just know what you want. So it is that sort of kind of, you figure out along the way that these people just. I'm lucky enough and fortunate enough to have worked with him a lot of times, and he gets it. But yeah, so we were able to achieve things quite quickly.
And if he's fighting with you over an idea or a concept, you trust that he's doing it for a reason.
Definitely. Yeah, he cares so much. And so, yeah, it's like, the panels on the back of the elevator weren't wood, they were white. And it's that kind of argument that we'll fight about for hours.
How did you come across Julia Garner for it?
Oh, I had seen The Americans, and years ago, when she was on screen, was like, who is that kid? I just thought she was so good. And then we were looking for somebody infinitely watchable, and that's Julia Garner. Her face is incredible. She's so striking. There's not much dialogue. You kind of have to watch her doing all manner of tasks, from photocopying to making coffee. So I needed someone you could just stare at. And she was, How
do you audition that? Or did you not audition? You had seen her on screen already and knew that she could do that.
We knew it would work, but I wanted to meet with her and check that she understood the script and understood what we were trying to achieve, and she did, and she was wonderful and lovely, and immediately we clicked, and it was like, okay, let's go.
Did you have, a lot of the film consists of, I would never say long takes, because you actually cut quite quickly in terms of your rhythm throughout the daily tasks. But did you ever construct it as much longer takes and an idea of how long some of these tasks actually take? And then when you got into the editing room, you were like, no, people get the idea. We can trim this.
Maybe a little bit. It's sort of, you have an idea of how long things will go. And to be honest, it's close to what I originally thought. But the best thing about this was we edited it quite quickly, but we screened it for audiences a lot. And we would just check when people would start fidgeting and kind of shorten, tighten, and lengthen things, like based on what we experienced. So we had a nice process.
So as at the risk of overusing this phrase, as formally daring as you also are very concerned with the entertainment value for the audience?
A little. Like, my mother is an artist, and she loves Bela Tar, who's a Hungarian filmmaker who makes 8-hour movies, and she's always like, darling, why can't you be more like Bela Tar? So I'm always...
Your form of rebellion is to be...
is to be a little shorter than that, and yeah.
A little, like 4.5 hours shorter.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't do the Bela Tar thing. I try so hard with Bela Tar, and even with who's the Stalker? Who's the Russian director?
Tarkovsky.
Even with Tarkovsky, I try so hard with them, and I'm kind of like, guys, these are long.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful, but like,
this
is long.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone's gonna drag me for that. I should have said that out loud.
Yeah. That's oof.
That cinephiles everywhere are getting their daggers
their
ready
heads.
for me. How did you come across Matthew Macfadyen?
I don't know. I'd
Having
seen
a
him.
moment.
Obviously, I hadn't seen Succession. Someone sent me a clip when we were casting him, but I'd seen him in, Pride and Prejudice and Anna Karenina, and so I knew who he was. And he was just someone I didn't want. I don't know. I just needed a phenomenal actor who was going to really kind of. It's a 12-page scene, but who would take that 12 pages in all these different directions. It's just the one scene he's in. So, and he was just so brilliant.
Shoot that in a day. Basically?
Yeah, one day. They just kept doing it over and over again, and it was so good every time. It was very it was amazing to watch.
When you have someone like Matthew in that scene, is he trying different things in every take, or are you very specific about what you wanted him to be doing and just sort of go for that?
The tricky thing is with a 12-page scene that they're doing the entire length of, it's really hard to then kind of, after you call cut, really get in and twist tweak too much. So you almost need to trust. It needs to be kind of broad strokes in terms of direction. You're kind of like, oh, well, maybe towards the end.
Doing one camera or 2 cameras?
One camera, yeah.
One camera,
yeah,
really?
So,
And are you doing like punch-ins or anything for certain moments in that scene? Or are you like 12 pages, let's do the scene, the entire scene front to back from different from the different angles?
pretty much 3 mids and 3 closes, and let's hope we get it.
I bet they loved that.
Yeah, it was like doing a little play. Like I think that they both enjoyed just having. I mean, they both had a clear point of view, which is the thing. Like Matthew's argument is kind of makes sense. You know what I mean? She doesn't have enough information, so she can't really. She's there, she's presenting her case, and he can poke holes in it. And so the two of them had a good time, I think, batting around those ideas because their characters had convincing points of view.
But that is the sort of, I mean, he, in a way, represents a kind of the history of these sorts of abuses, right? Like, part of Me Too has been this idea that like men are consistently like, but you know, it's just a hearsay or it's just an accusation, like he said, she said kind of thing, rather than actually listening and hearing and following through on what women are bringing to the table in their arguments. For so long, it's been like, no, I don't think so. And that's sort of his role. Yeah, exactly. He represents all of that, which is crazy. What a weight to bear. What a weight to bear for Matthew Macfadyen. Yeah. A lot of the conversations that I've had with people who have seen the movies, we talk about the mundanity of evil, and I'm wondering if that was something. Obviously, that was written in regards to the Nazis, a different subject. But I do think that I'm wondering if that was something that was on your mind when you were writing this, considering, as I've said to you before, the way that she has to put the indignity of putting water bottles in his personal refrigerator is almost as horrifying as the abusive phone calls. And just in terms of the way that you film them, they're still sort of shrouded in this like low-pitched abusive hum of The Office. I'm wondering if you were thinking about that while you were writing it and shooting it. Definitely. I mean, yeah, it's the banality of evil was like the focus, and also this idea that abuse is sort of utterly ordinary. Like there's nothing sexy about it. There's nothing. So we were trying to make sure we kind of. But that's that no titillation thing, right? Yeah. Like even when people try to depict abuse, when they get into. I mean, a great example of this is like Martin Scorsese, who arguably the greatest filmmaker. He's amazing, but you watch a scene in Raging Bull where De Niro's abusing his wife in the beginning, and it's thrilling. It's a terrifying moment, but it's a thrilling piece of cinema. And you not depicting the abuser, not depicting the predator and his abuses removes that sort of thrilling aspect of it. Yeah. I mean, I hope people can still sit through the movie. But at the same time, it was... You think I'm underselling? Yeah. I apologize. You remove all the drama. But no, it's still... We were trying to be sensitive and delicate. These are really touchy themes. And there's a lot of trauma, like I was saying, baked into something like this, which is just not only the survivors, but the people who worked at these companies. So we were trying to make sure we were being, like, just... Yeah, it was relatable also to anyone who's worked in a job like that. It was transferable to any industry. So yeah, we focused on the ordinary, not the extraordinary. That was the idea going in, and we ran with that. How did you develop the sound design? Because I mentioned the low-pitch hum of The Office, but that also seems to be somehow running through the whole film, which if you do work in an office like that, that sound just stays in the back of your mind for long periods of time after you walk out of that office. Right. I mean, I worked with Leslie Schatz, who's a sound designer who's incredible, who's done all Gus Van Sant's movies, and it was that makes sense. The dream. I was so excited to work with him. So we just Elephant is maybe the greatest sound design of a movie. Exactly. And it's kind of similar to, I think, what you're doing here. Yeah, we tried to kind of, definitely, like, it's very atmospheric, and we were kind of working with all these kind of New York City sounds, and he had people out recording kind of sirens and helicopters and traffic and fluorescent lights and just everything we could to kind of create the soundscape. But yeah, we spent a lot of time, because there's barely any music, basically. I wanted it to be quite spare and quite kind of authentic to her lived experience. So yeah, the soundscape was really important. There is a moment of music in it, I don't want to give away when it is, but was that always part of your construction of the movie, that at that moment light music would happen, or did you find that in the edit it added something to put it in there?
I knew that I'd probably get in trouble from the financiers and producers if I had no music at all. So I kind of knew I had to put it in sparingly. Not that they, people
Smartly drop it in that in that moment, so they're like, "Oh, great."
there is some. Okay, good. Yeah, there's just a little.
Forget it if I put it here.
Yeah, yeah. But there is some in the beginning and some in the end, and basically that's it. So yeah, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, I forgot about the beginning. I'd only remember the in the end.
Yeah, there's music in the beginning as well. So
When
it's
she's
bookended.
when she's leaving the apartment, her
Yeah, yeah.
apartment.
As she's driving through the city. Yeah.
Right. We have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who has a question? Right here, sir.
How you doing? My name's Luke. I was wondering, what are you hoping men take away from this movie?
Yeah, interesting, man. It's I guess I would say, I mean, a lot of men come out of it feeling a little uncomfortable because it is kind of highlighting behaviors that are sort of considered okay socially, but that do kind of cut a young woman's confidence quite deeply. So the idea that men can have a think about the way they've been treating their colleagues and treating the other women in the office, if we can kind of analyze these little boys clubs that seem to exist and sort of disband those, that would be great. I want everyone to kind of come away thinking about their own we're all kind of complicit in this system that kind of keeps women out and has for so long. And so the idea is if we can kind of examine our own behavior and just sort of change things moving forward, or just kind of consider others and try and make our workplaces as fair and equitable as possible, then that would be ideal. Yeah.
Great answer. Yeah. One more.
Hi. How does your process differ from directing this movie versus some of your previous films?
I'm not sure. I mean, I directed a lot of documentaries and a hybrid documentary, and I went to narrative fiction film school though, so I've kind of done everything, and I'm not sure. It just sort of depends on it's all about the moment, and when you're directing, it's about whoever's in front of you and the camera and how to make that work. I don't know if I'm really kind of thinking about the differences. I mean, the clear difference with this one is I had an actor, which is Julia, and the two of us kind of created the character together. She's in every scene, basically almost every shot. So it was a lot of, that collaboration was different, and that was amazing. Working with her was incredible, and so I was very fortunate that I got someone like her to work with, and we were able to kind of carry the character together in a way. Like she's the body, but I was the eyes. Like I shoot her point of view. And so I'd say that was the difference in this time. That was just a phenomenal kind of experience for me.
When you're working with Julia and you're shooting her reactions to a moment, be it, the young girl coming into the office, or like in the room where the young girl is signing potentially employment papers or something else. When you're shooting her reaction, are you very specific about what you want, or do you shoot variations of what that might be so you can have that in the editing room?
I wish we had time for variations, but we almost didn't. We were kind of stuck. We're so limited in the time we had that we almost needed to be pretty clear. So the two of us spent a lot of time in pre-production figuring out how the character was feeling in every scene, so that when we got onto the set, we could hope we got it right. But definitely with it, take by take, she does different things, and she's so extraordinary. There's so much going on in her eyes, and you can kind of see the wheels turning every time. So I was fortunate enough that those variations can kind of really influence the way the take lands and the way the performance lands.
But it's not just what she's feeling and what she's depicting. It's tonally how she's doing it. It's so in sync with what you're doing aesthetically. How did you find that with her? Or is that something that you just hope she gets based off of what you've said the movie is going to be?
It's both. I feel like we were very lucky in that we connected, and it was very kind of almost like spiritual. Like we made it sense to each other. By the end, we didn't even need to communicate that much. I'd kind of say, oh, you know that one, and she'd be like, oh yeah, I know what I did. Like we kind of had a shorthand by the end that was so, I don't know, that relationship really worked. We did have a lot of time. We had a month of pre. So her and I would meet, we'd chat to assistants together, we'd go through photos, we'd talk about like kind of the character. So we did have a lot of time to chat, and I think that...
Did you chat with any assistants from the company that this is inspired by?
I mean, it's inspired by not just one company, but yeah, I chatted to assistants from a bunch of different companies, including the Weinstein Company, Miramax, but also production companies that are still in existence today. And so, yeah, it's tough to kind of talk about them because they're people that are still working in these places. But yeah, a lot of research, and not just the film industry. To be honest, I chatted to women in tech and women in engineering, and who all had similar stories. So
finance as well. I bet all these.
Yeah,
places.
finance.
Yeah.
I met a woman at Sundance who worked for a yacht company and said, "That's me." It's like, I work for a yacht company in Salt Lake. So, that kind of stuff.
I buy that.
Yeah.
A yacht
company in Salt Lake.
buy
Is
that.
there one in Salt Lake? I don't know. that sounds fake.
Oh, that's the idea that it's in Salt Lake.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what
maybe
sounds
she
strange
wasn't
about it.
in Salt Lake. Now I'm thinking, but she was at the Salt Lake screening.
How did you find that the male actors responded to performing some of these scenes? Because you are asking them to depict something that they may have taken for granted in their lives. I mean, I know I was talking to someone about the movie last night, and I was saying that, like, don't even try to tell me. It was another guy, and I was like, don't even try to tell me that 10 years ago you wouldn't have made jokes like that without even thinking about it if that was your boss or if you happened to be within that power structure. And they tried to be like, no, I know. And I was like, that's a complete lie. You would have worked there because it's a big company. You'd have been excited to be there, and it would have become typical for you.
Yeah.
And that's how you get by day to day. You wouldn't even have thought twice about it.
Definitely. I think a lot of people made jokes like that, and up until maybe 2 years, people still do, but it's getting a little better. I cast the two nicest men like John Orsini and Noah Robbins are just so sweet and so kind, and to be honest, I don't know if they would be those kind of guys. They're really great. And that was partly our casting agent, A.V. Kaufman, who kind of picked them out and said, these guys get it. But yeah, we wanted to make sure everyone on that set understood what the issues and understood the material and understood what we were trying to explore. And so we were very conscious of who we were getting involved in this.
I think what I love, one of the things I love about the film, though, that I think even a man could watch it or be in it and be like, I get this. And then all of a sudden be in the moment of depicting one of these microaggressions and have a self-realization of like, oh yeah, I probably have contributed in some way to this kind of behavior at some point in my life.
Completely. I've even had filmmaker friends I had a filmmaker friend who took 3 weeks to respond. I knew they watched it because they'd seen the Vimeo link, that they'd seen it, but there was no response. And normally they tell me when they don't like my work. And I was waiting for the response, and finally I got one, and it said, I'm feeling a little guilty because I have a few assistants who do far too much for me, and I'm still struggling with that, wrestling with that. And I thought, that's an amazing response. If people can kind of have a think about their behavior, have a think about who works for them, acknowledge the people around them. Even we had a screening last night, and everyone was very worried about the women carrying hors d'oeuvres and handing them around. Everyone's being very nice to them because they suddenly thought, oh, I have to acknowledge that person now. I haven't thought about her experience. I'm sure, she's having a rough night. I should be, so it was interesting the way it makes you think about these dynamics. And
well, because so often abuses of power are depicted on so far to one side of the spectrum. You can very easily feel comfortable and feel like, give yourself a pat on the back for not being that bad. Whereas in this, the abuses of power, with the exception of one person who is a bully and a monster, but he's more or less off screen the whole time, the abuses of power are far more subtle and just based off of proximity in a way.
Yeah, there's a scene where a man hops into the elevator and a famous actor hops into the elevator with her, and she's just standing next to her, but he's taking up all the space and completely oblivious to the fact that she's standing next to him. And that scene means a lot to people. I had a woman who was one of the crew who came out to me and says, isn't it amazing the way white men take up space? And I thought, that's brilliant. Like, so all those little moments, kind of exploring kind of the complexity of power, who has it, how we can kind of prevent its abuse, how we can share it around. Like, that was sort of what we were trying to go for.
How did it's Patrick Wilson, and how did you approach him about playing that quick cameo, and what were his thoughts on it?
I mean, he's great. I saw him last night. He's such a lovely, kind guy, and he was kind of happy to be. He understood what we were trying to do. His wife's in the movie, actually. So that was Dagmara Dominchik is in the movie. So she's a part of it, and so she, I think, helped was part of getting him involved. But yeah, he's so brilliant and really, just understood the project from the beginning. So yeah.
Well, Kitty, I love the film. Another great movie. Thank you so much for making it.
Oh, thank you so much.
When can people see The Assistant?
Friday.
This Friday.
This Friday. It's in theaters in New York and LA, and then we're expanding out after that. So
amazing.
Tell your friends.
Go see it in theaters. It is a movie that should be seen in the theater. The great Kitty Green, everybody. Let's hear it.
Thank you so much.
Hey.